This module sets the stage for exploring what GitHub Copilot can really do in a modern development workflow. My name is Peter Detender, a lead technical trainer here at Microsoft. I've been using GitHub Copilot almost daily in my role as a trainer since we gained internal access to it. Rather than focusing on theory, this section is about practical capability, where I'm clarifying how Copilot supports developers and DevOps engineers like yourself as they write, review, and reason about code across different tools and environments. It also introduces the idea that Copilot is not just a coding helper, but it's becoming a consistent AI companion, integrated throughout the developer experience. As we move through this module, the real goal is to help you build confidence in using Copilot effectively and responsibly. By understanding its features end-to-end, you'll be better equipped to increase productivity, reduce friction, and deliver high-quality code while also keeping security and governance in mind. This first slide outlines what you'll learn in this module, where we're going to start with how different GitHub Copilot plans work and what management and customization options they provide. It also explains how Copilot integrates with standard tools such as Visual Studio Code, as well as the command line, making it super accessible wherever developers like yourself already work. Beyond practical usage, this module also covers foundational concepts such as prompt engineering, how Copilot uses the large language models, and how data is handled. These topics help explain not just what Copilot does, but how and why, which is critical for troubleshooting, trusting it, and effective adoption of it. Now, if you completed Module 1, you have already seen a similar table that explains the different GitHub Copilot capabilities across the free, the pro, the business, and enterprise plans, particularly around management policies and security controls. Higher tier plans introduce features like centralized user management, public code filtering, as well as audit logging, which are really essential in regulated or enterprise environments. Now, when selecting a plan, organizations should consider factors such as data privacy, retention policies, and intellectual property protection. These considerations help ensure Copilot can be rolled out safely and compliantly while still delivering productivity benefits at scale. GitHub Copilot provides real-time code suggestions as you type, ranging from single-line completions to entire blocks of code. What makes this powerful is adaptability. Copilot learns from the surrounding context, including naming conventions, formatting styles, as well as design patterns already present in your existing codebase. You as a developer benefit by spending less time looking up syntax or maybe debugging common logic issues. With support for many popular languages and a multi-suggestion pane, Copilot offers flexible options that allow you as a developer to remain in that flow while selecting the suggestion that best fits the need. GitHub Copilot Chat introduces conversational AI directly into your development environment. So instead of researching externally, you as a developer can ask questions about your code, requesting explanations, or while not generating new logic, all that using natural language, and actually without leaving the editor. It also supports more advanced workflows, including debugging, optimizations, and step-by-step guidance. Features such as /comments and agents help scoping requests and automating everyday tasks, making your Copilot Chat a versatile assistant throughout the development lifecycle. Now with that, let me present the first demonstration for this module, where I'm focusing on GitHub Copilot Chat as well as inline chat. The main goal is to show you how developers, DevOps engineers, cloud admins can interact with Copilot conversationally, as well as directly within the code editor to solve problems in a more efficient way. I will demonstrate how Copilot can assist with coding, reducing context switching, maintaining highly interactive, responsive development. So I'm excited to jump into this next part of my demo sequence where I'm actually going to try and help you a little bit to maybe follow along, or if you're watching this as a video later on, or maybe you go through like, just show me things, Peter, and then you go like, oh my God, this is cool. I actually want to play with this. I actually have my demo repository with the sample apps that I'll show you in a second available on, you could guess it, my GitHub profile. So the starting point is, I'll make it again a little bit bigger. So if you go to github.com/petender, that's my GitHub handle, and then you look for skills getting started with GitHub Copilot and dashes in between each and every word. You can basically fork or clone the repo, and you have the exact same starting point as what I'm going to use for technically this demo and most of the other ones in the different modules. I cloned this to my GitHub environment into my local VS Code, and I have my code file available. We talked about how to install GitHub Copilot. I opened my chat window, and for now we're going to use ask mode. So again, ask mode means I'm going to run a few prompts. I'm going to ask a few questions, right, if you want, and waiting for GitHub Copilot to provide me with an answer. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit transparent. I have sample prompts on the side because I don't want to spend a lot of time literally typing in prompts if they become a little bit longer. So if you see prompts showing up, just know that I'm just grabbing them from my little notepad document. So the first one I can do is using something which points specifically to, I would say, VS Code experience. What do I mean by that? If I go down into the chat window, I can use a little bit of a tooling, as we call it, and that's the workspace. Now, again, this is VS Code and yes, Visual Studio specific, where the workspace basically means this is your open project inside the development environment. I think in IntelliJ and Eclipse, you call this a project. So the add workspace is not available in other environments. I'm not going to talk through all options here in Workspace, but you'll see me using most of them throughout the different demos in the different videos. Now, when I do add Workspace, it actually allows me or telling me to Copilot, like, hey, I want you to look in the totality of the project in any possible files that you can recognize. And starting with a pretty high-level question here, please briefly explain the structure of the project and what should I do to run it. Now imagine here you're a junior developer or maybe a senior developer, but junior into some weird coding layout that you don't really know what it looks like. Honestly, in my case, as you know, I'm not a developer, but the little bit of coding experience I have over the last couple of years was primarily .NET oriented. So I know a bit what kind of files I can expect in a typical .NET project, and this doesn't look at all like it. I can recognize there's a PyTest, I got a source folder, there's some Py files, so most probably this is Python. But I might be wrong because again, I don't want to spend a lot of time going through all those files, which in the end is what we did before using Copilot. So now by firing off this pretty high level but already accurate prompt, I'm just going to ask like, just tell me what this project is about. Now what it's going to do here, as you can see, is looking at 28 different references. What are those references? Well, technically all the files inside this code folder, technically inside the repo. It starts collecting information and it's bringing back a description. I'll make this a little bit larger. And that's where you can see if you loop through multiple prompts, which obviously I did just in preparation for the demos, but think of this as a real life scenario where you're most probably not just looking into one single prompt runoff. You're going to use multiple prompts throughout your development/DevOps experience, and that's where you can now always go back and forth. I'm going to move this back a little bit. and showing you the response. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the exact details. That's why I shared the repo. And obviously, if you want to go through similar demos or exercise that I'm demoing, then you could spend a little bit more time. But I think overall, it's doing a really good job. What do I mean by that? Well, it starts with an explanation about the application. I didn't launch it yet. I'm going to show you that later on. But what we're building here is a little application for high school activities, allowing students to sign up for specific activities. Without asking too much, again, this is not super specific in my prompting. It's already providing a project structure. Most of the code is inside that source folder location, and it's clarifying the different key components. Part of the backend using Python Fast API, and then there's a front end where we're using JavaScript together with obviously HTML. Next to that, although I didn't really specify a lot, I was just asking like, what should I do to run it? Because again, imagine this is a Python app. I know that I can do .NET run, but that's not going to help my Python environment. And it's now telling me how to run and debug my environment. And then if you want, it also tells me like, well, if you're not all that familiar with all those steps, you can actually do the same from the terminal. It also clarifies last here what are some of the dependencies, like bringing in the packages to run my application. So I think with that, I'm going to follow the instructions, literally what GitHub Copilot tells me how to run it. In the left sidebar, select Run and Debug tab. So that's probably this one. Look at that, Run and Debug. So we found it. Click the Start Debugging, that's over here. And it tells me the app will start on port 8000. How do we know? Because down here, it actually tells me. It's running on my local machine. So I'm going to follow this link. I'm going to open my browser and my application is live running. Why is this so powerful? Because again, I'm totally new to Python. I have no idea what the code is about. Maybe I grabbed some sample code. Maybe this is code that one of my peer developers has been working on. They might still be part of the company, moved on to a different team, maybe moved on to a different project. You get that idea, right? Where now I'm like, hey, Peter, here you go, clone that repo and just have fun. And now you go like, well, I need to spend so much time on getting into the familiarity of what the code is about, what's the framework like. And now in just a couple of minutes, just by running a pretty easy, straightforward prompt, it told me this is the project structure. It explained all the details about the actual coding files, and then also telling me exactly, literally, step by step, how to run it. I think although it's the first prompt experience, I'm already getting quite convinced. But it's not all yet. I'm going to move back to my VS Code environment, and I'm going to launch a slightly different prompt here, where one of the scenarios, again, you could imagine my colleagues told me about, the reason why I got pulled into this project is because there are some problems with the application. So what is the problem here? Students are able to register twice for activity. So we're not really checking, did they already register yes or no? And I guess maybe as a developer, it could be one of those tasks where you could become responsible to make sure that that bug is no longer in our application. So again, without you spending time reading through all the code, trying to find that little piece that's missing, just rely on Copilot and almost naturally ask your question, same way as you would probably ask your colleagues. I'm going to fire this off again, giving it a couple of seconds. Where now it's going to provide me a clarification and then technically also the actual code solution on how to update my application Python file, which now means that I can read through and then obviously comparing with the existing code. So let me bring up my actual application code. I'm going to move my terminal down a little bit. This is all my existing code. Now, as you can see here, it's not showing me all updates, but it's mapping like these are some of the code changes that you need to bring in here. Now, again, in the old approach to updating code, you would probably go through the different screens, reading through, maybe mapping some documentation, from sample code, from maybe other reference code that you already have, from other apps within the company, where now it's just intuitive into the same environment. This for now is just a code suggestion. It's up to me, what we call the human in the loop, to decide, do we want to bring in this code? You don't have to. Again, it's just a suggestion. But I like to rely on Copilot to help me writing code, maybe rewriting code, and that's where we have a few action buttons up here. The first one is a little document with a plus sign. I know it's a bit small and I don't want to zoom in too much and zoom out again. I don't want to get you sick while watching my demo, but it's allowing me to override your existing code. What that means is, since we're pointing at the application Python file, it keeps all code that's not relevant to the specific problem here untouched, but then adding more code into the correct location and then hopefully fixing the problem. The second one is an option that I personally think it's a little bit tricky, but that's probably because of me. It's insert this little code snippet inside your already existing code file, but based on where your cursor is. Now, honestly, I never know up to this location here where my cursor is. That's every now and then where I got feedback from learners like, well, I used it, it moves code into the code file. I try to compile it, run it, and it's failing. And then most probably it's because you didn't really pay attention. Or the third option is just a copy where it's copying the full section. And then obviously you could go like, well, I like this comment here, and just using the regular copy paste and only grabbing snippets of the suggestion. So I'm going to keep it for now. I like the suggestion. And just a little confirmation here. Where now it's going to prompt me, it's going to ask me like, hey, are you sure you want to move this into the active editor? Now you might go like, wait a minute, Peter, you were so convinced that Copilot is smart, and over here, even in the explanation, it's showing that it's updating the application Python file. Why is it asking it? Doesn't it know that over here, we're in that application Python file? Well, technically, yes, it recognizes it. Now, I'm pretty sure in any of your development experiences, you probably have multiple files open. So if I start opening up more files, which I guess we typically do as developers, you can see that up here it's now switching the active context. So it's a little safety net, I call it, to make sure that if I'm injecting updates, it's just going to ask me like, well, do you want to do this inside your existing file? Or maybe in a new editing file, like creating a new snippet of code. That's the whole idea. So I'm going to accept in the active. And then you can see here that it's showing the old original piece of code and then adding the new suggestion into it. Next to that, and again, I'm pretty sure a lot of you developer DevOps engineers are familiar with this little keep undo. That's nothing GitHub Copilot, it's my source control. Remember, I started from an existing GitHub repo, cloned it to my local machine, and that's where source control obviously is still present. So it's not a Copilot feature, it's just because it's source control. I accept all the changes where I could go back running my app. Now you could see here, it's already updating it, it refreshed, and we could go back in the browser and then validating if it's working. Why am I emphasizing the fact that it's recommended to validate your changes? Well, again, it's just a tooling. I love the power of it, and I think out of my examples, but typically demo apps, proof of concept alike level, it's like 90% accurate. But it doesn't mean that we should accept just any code suggestion. So I'm going to wrap up this part of the demo. So in short, what we did here is asking for a project description using that add workspace keyword, right? Then walked you through some of the terminal experience where it explained literally step by step. These are all the steps that you need to actually launch the application, and then already showing you a little bit of what GitHub Copilot can do from a coding suggestion perspective, using 3 different lightweight prompts, not super in-depth yet, but already showing you a bit how you are still in control by running your prompts and then asking a little bit more specific what you want to get out of that. Now for the next part of the demo, I want to highlight inline chat. So up till now, I used the chat interface on the side. And again, I told you, you're going to use this quite a lot, but it's not the only option you have. So let me move out my chat. And there's a couple of different ways, by the way. I like to use this little chat icon on top, but you could technically just close it, and that's going to be the same thing. Closing it doesn't mean that it's completely gone. You just push it a little bit to the side. Now, what is inline chat? A couple of different experiences here. So the first one, and again, this is VS Code, so it might be a little bit different depending on your coding environment, but I'm using VS Code on a Windows environment, which means I can trigger inline chat using Control-I. You can most probably configure the shortcut keys in your VS Code settings, but I'm accepting the defaults. Now what I have here, and not breaking down the experience, I think it's really cool and really intuitive, but you got like 2-3 lines of code to get your interaction running. So you can from here run your prompts. You can wait for feedback. It's all happening in that inline chat. Now, what is the use case here? I would say the chat experience on the side is typically looking at the totality of a file. And if you open up more files, it's going to look in all of them. Where now the inline chat experience is typically built for a small section of your code, like maybe one line in the full coding file. But from here, I could now ask more details, where let's say I want to add more activities. I showed you the web app. We have our school web application. We allow students to sign up for activities, and maybe we want to add more activities to it. What I want is update this little piece of code where we have 3 sample activities and just asking for more. Now again, pretty cool example. It's maybe even proof of concept like data. I navigate to activities, or I could select the whole activity section. So typically what you would do as a developer, where now I'm going to select activities. I launch my inline chat. Again, I'm using Control-I. And then here I could add 2 more activities, or 5 or 50, just easy example, to the array, where then I'm going to ask keep the content in line with what I already have or with the existing ones. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm trying to do here. Asking Copilot, add 2 more activities to the array, keep the content in line, which means it should give me a title. It should follow or respect the description, the schedule, number of participants, and then adding the actual participants to it. We kick it off, and then hopefully it's going to add some more information to it. So it added a drama club, it added a science club, source control, not part of Copilot, as you already know, and I'm going to keep it. Looks good, but at the same time, my VS Code is now sort of warning me that there's a problem with the syntax. How do I know? It tells me up here, there's a red file over here, and it also shows me the little thumbnail of my code, and eventually over here as well. And now you could go like, okay, nice try, Peter, but it's messing up my existing code. Well, let me show you something else. I navigate to the location where we do have a problem, and this has been around in VS Code and Visual Studio, and I'm pretty sure in other development environments where historically we relied on smart IntelliSense, where it's adding like, oh, there's a problem, this is the problem description, which you can see up here, where now we also have a quick fix, nothing new, we had that for the last 10 years, but now we also have regular fix. Or maybe it's super smart GitHub Copilot triggered fix. That's what that little sparkly icon is for. So I'm going to do this again. I navigate to my problem, I read through it, and now I'm going to ask Copilot to fix it for me. It needs a little bit of time. It's going to scan my code. And that's where sometimes this little window is a bit too small, but it could be my eyes getting a bit older. It just tells me like, well, I'm modifying the selected code. It's going to highlight again source control based. This is the old code, this is the new. I'm going to keep it, and looks like everything's healthy. I could run my app again. Since it's Python, it's probably triggered. I'm going to refresh, and you can see that everything is nicely added without changing anything in my code. Super powerful. Why? Because from here, what I showed you is it's now capable of adding code inside the code experience. No longer chat. It's still a suggestion, but it's closer to the code. But typically for like small individual code lines or a selection, but not for the totality of the file or sometimes even the project. Now from here, I can actually show you something else where I'm going to navigate back to my chat window. And up till now, we used the ask mode. Where now I can shift to editing mode. Now editing here doesn't mean editing the prompts that we used before, not editing anything that's already in the chat history, but it's actually giving me file change, file modification, code modification even across different files. And you might go like, well, we had that edit option in VS Code and any other development environment where you would navigate to view and then open view or selection and then running some search. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. So what we can do here is I open up my application Python file, and I'm going to add some more files into it, where inside my static I have my JavaScript file. I'm going to add it to the context, got my styles file and my index. Why? Because now maybe I want to add something into the experience of my app where I know as a developer out of my experience that if I make a change in, let's say, the layout, changing something in the index HTML, I typically need to make a change in the cascading style sheet file. But then I also need to add some logic in the JavaScript file, where now you need to keep track of all those changes across all the different files. And that's where I would say, again, honestly, as a not really developer, I'm getting lost. But now I know, like, I'm going to move a couple of files, not the full project, but this technically could work for the full project. And I'm going to run a prompt where I'm just going to copy it because I don't like to bore you with typing in long prompts. And I'll show you and talk a bit through what this actually means. So now I'm going to ask, hey, Copilot, you don't have to be nice, but I try to be nice to technology because maybe at some point they might take over the world. Can you please edit the activity cards to add a participant section? It will show what participants that are already signed up for that specific activity as a bulleted list, and then also remember to make it pretty, whatever that means. I'm relying a bit on Copilot freestyling to just get me excited. So I'm going to run this, where now you can see up here, it's using 3 references. So it's basically, oh, there's 4 files, but I already have one of them open here, so that's where it comes from. It's providing a little description. I'm going to update the front-end JavaScript. I'm going to update the styling, and I'm going to handle the edge cases, rewriting code in all possible files that I dragged and dropped onto the chat window, and it already performed the changes. Where now I could look into each and every of these files. Source control is still here, but now I don't want to click around in like these 3 or 4 files, keeping it, maybe undoing it. I can do this all from here. One little button immediately integrated from Copilot Chat into the source control experience. I'm going to keep it, and I think I don't need to restart. You can look into some file changes and it restarted, and I guess if I navigate back and I'm going to refresh, we can now see that the site got nicely updated, keeping everything in place that was there, but also adding more information to it without actually rewriting, without spending a lot of time moving across all those files. That's what the editing mode is doing. Another notable feature of GitHub Copilot is now using command line integration, which enables developers, DevOps engineers to ask questions and receive explanations or even comment suggestions directly from within the terminal. This is super helpful for understanding complex commands or recovering from an error, such as undoing a commit. The first option is built into Visual Studio Code, where you can use add terminal to have Copilot Chat really reading the console output and providing a response. This can provide clarification, sharing documentation, or helping you with troubleshooting when the terminal encounters an error. Another command line integration is using GitHub Copilot CLI. By simplifying command line interactions, Copilot makes powerful CLI tools more approachable for beginners while speeding up workflows for more experienced users. The result is again fewer interruptions and getting more confidence while working in terminal-centric environments. And obviously you can imagine I had another demo come up to walk you through the experience of using GitHub Copilot in CLI, highlighting how you, as a developer or DevOps engineer, can interact with it naturally inside the terminal. Hopefully, seeing this live reinforces what I mentioned earlier, how Copilot supports you as a developer beyond the preferred development editor, making it even traditionally intimidating tools like the CLI more productive as well as user-friendly. I hope you're getting convinced that it's now becoming more of a powerful peer developer friend, but what if I'm not in VS Code? Or maybe I'm doing a lot more in the terminal and I want to navigate across the terminal, or maybe something goes wrong. Let me show you a few other things. Let me start from the terminal. So what I can do here is navigating to my project. I called it a 300 getting started. And then from here, let's make this a little bit more convincing that I'm not using VS Code. I'm going to minimize it. I don't need my website. There we go. Like, the terminal is my friend, right? So what I can do here is now typing in Copilot, giving it a couple of seconds. And what I did here is now bringing in Copilot, the chat experience, and if you want inline, but not really inline in the terminal, and it's now becoming available for this specific folder. How does it work? Not just by installing VS Code extension in VS Code. You need to go to the GitHub website, downloading Copilot CLI, just an easy install like any other plugins, and from there it starts working. But it's still respecting your machine, it's still respecting the security of your machine, where now the first thing it's going to ask me is like, hey, do you trust the files in this folder? You can go yes or yes and remember, because you don't want to confirm this little step over and over if it's like your project you're working on for the next couple of days, weeks, maybe months. And I'm going to go like, sure, I trust you, you can use it. What I can do here is running pretty much anything that I already used before. I used one of the easy prompts before, like just explain what the project is about, and I can repeat the same thing here. Can you provide me with a high-level overview of this project? It's using the exact same experience, where it's going to look into the code files, and it's providing me a little summary of what I asked for. The goal of this app is simple web app for our school with students registering for activities and so on and so on. You know what the app is about in meantime, so not going to bore you with the outcome, but it's actually quite intuitive. And again, try to forget a minute that I showed you a lot of this already in VS Code, because maybe you don't have VS Code installed. Maybe you just get access to like a terminal, and you go like, oh, it would be cool if Copilot would be available in my terminal. And that's exactly what we have here. Even better, what if I switch back to VS Code and I'm going to use the terminal from inside my VS Code? I already have it because it's running my app, but I'm going to stop it for a second. I'm going to close my terminal. I'm going to start a new chat conversation, which, by the way, is something you can always do. And I recommend this to every now and then refresh, you could say, the state of your chat. Now, in the presentation, I talked about conversational context, which means that as long as you're in that flow of your chat conversation, it sort of remembers, you could say, what that chat conversation is about. It remembers your actions, your prompts. It remembers some of the responses. But that's also where that generative AI might get lost a little bit. So that's where the hallucination comes up. So out of my own experience, and it's also a little bit overall generative AI guidelines, is to refresh, like clear the memory state and just start from a fresh memory state. What I'm going to do is go back to the terminal and just going to clear it. And then from here, I could now interact with my terminal. For example, down here, I'm back in the chat window, and now I can do add terminal, and it's going to look into my terminal. Now, I didn't really have anything on my terminal, so what if I start debugging it again? My app is running, and I could now use add terminal /explain, and you can see that it's helping me already translating what that little shortcut keyword is actually doing. This is probably one of the easiest prompts you can run. Add workspace, do something. Add terminal, do something. Well, now it's going to look into the terminal, and it's explaining my last couple of actions. I ran the CLS, like clear screen, at least on a Windows environment, and it knows like, oh, this is the command that you would run on a Windows platform. And then it also provides me an explanation what that actually is doing. And then it's also helping me like, well, I'm smart. I know that you're running Windows, but on Linux and macOS, it would be clear. Now, it's hard to simulate errors, but I'm going to try and maybe break my code. Let's see if we can do that. Well, no, I'm going to do something else. I'm not going to break my code because I want to use this app for all my other demos, but I'm going to do .NET Run. As you know, from the start, I'm not super comfortable with Python. Well, sort of. Just part of my demo story, right? Where I'm like, oh, I want to run this app, and just out of, I don't know, automation habit, I'm going to do .NET Run, and oh my God, it's not working. I have no idea why not. So let's go back to our chat friend. I'm going to do add terminal. And again, explain, or if you forget about the add terminal explain shortcut, it's just the good old prompting that we talked about before, where now I can do, can you explain why my .NET Run on the terminal is not starting or not working? So out of that context, remember conversational context, Copilot is recognizing the terminal. It's going to look into the terminal view, and it's going to recognize the keywords, the explanations, the error messages that you have here. And then on top of that, that's where it obviously becomes really cool. It's telling me like, well, this is a Python app. It's not a .NET project. Here's what's happening. It's explaining the .NET steps. And then it's like, well, it cannot run .NET because you don't have the .NET files. And then I could go back like just refreshing the chat, and it's telling me this is how you run this actual project. Just by looking at the terminal. Now I know this might feel like an easy example, but how many times when you're running code, you're trying to debug it, checking it out, it's throwing error messages that sometimes they're pretty clear, most of the time they're honestly not, and you go like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to go to yet another website and searching for a specific error code or an error message. It's all embedded in the chat experience, but now reusing your terminal view. I hope this was quite convincing, but we're not done yet. I already showed a few examples of prompts, but I didn't really focus too much on what the industry calls prompt engineering. Now actually within Microsoft, we like to call it the art of the prompt. Engineering might deter people because it may sound too technical. In the context of developers, DevOps engineers, cloud admins like yourself, I suppose it is actually acceptable. Now, if you're a business user and you rely on the Microsoft 365 Copilot, you may not consider yourself an engineer. Ultimately, prompting is the technical term for just asking questions. In reality, it's more than that. It's about crafting clear, practical instructions to ensure that GitHub Copilot produces relevant, accurate results. Now this slide here introduces core principles like clarity, specificity, and focus to guide AI-driven code generation. Now before diving into additional advanced strategies for prompting, let me move to my whiteboard for a couple of minutes and clarifying why and how using prompts efficiently is essential. So I'll give you my quick example on what prompting or the art of the prompt or prompt engineering is about, but also that it's not always that complex, but also coming with a few watch outs. So first of all, what are the building blocks of a prompt? Well, obviously you need to ask the question, but inside the question, you need to provide as much context as you can. From there, preferably, you also gonna specify a goal, like this is what I want to get out, like what is the prompt response that I'm expecting. And if it's relevant, you would also include the persona, where you could think, mapping it a bit with a GitHub Copilot context, I could provide a prompt where my goal is help me writing code, create unit tests, or do anything else that I'll walk you through in the other modules. The persona, it's going to influence, talk to a developer, junior developer, senior developer, maybe pinpointing a DevOps engineer, cloud admin, something like that. So that's where your prompts, your questions will become a lot more specific. Now also keep in mind that it's providing you the most accurate statistical answer. Because remember that it's all based on that large language model that we talked about before, and it's nothing more than mathematics. Now, what is my easy example? Don't take it negative. I'm not offending GitHub Copilot, but I call it the 5-year-old kid. I assume that some of you can imagine what the 5-year-old kid actually means. I describe it looking at my own 2 kids, but they're 21 and 25 in the meantime. They think they know everything. And it comes with an attitude. Now imagine a scenario where we ask the 5-year-old kid, what do you want to eat? So if you think about your own kids, or even myself in this case, my favorite food is pizza and maybe pasta. Well, most probably in my personal case. But then going back to the 5-year-old kid, I'm pretty sure if you ask them, there's probably candy, there's cookies, and so much more. The everything and attitude, well, I remember those scenarios where they go like nothing. Or I don't know. And then I'm also going to add my favorite, and that's pancakes. Now if we go back to the sample prompt, what do you want to eat over here? Well, technically, in the prompt input, rendering, and output, all these answers are valid. You could argue like, well, maybe the nothing, maybe the I don't know, but in the end, out of like prompt techniques, it's basically still an answer. You might not like it, it might not be the statistically most accurate, but technically they're still answers. But then what if we add a little bit more context? We could ask, what do you want to eat? But now adding a little bit into it, like, well, it's 7 in the morning. Where then 7 in the morning, you're going to ask your 5-year-old kid, like, hey, what do you want to eat? Again, all those answers are still valid. But then maybe how you, I don't know, train your kid, like the large language model got used to train the model and generative AI. Well, pizza and pasta, you're not doing that at 7 in the morning. But what if you add a goal where you go like, well, it's 7 in the morning, before dropping off the kid at school, you ask the question, what do you want to eat for dinner, maybe for lunch or any other timeline? That's heavily influencing. Next to that last example, what's the whole deal with pancakes? Well, you could go like, well, 7 in the morning, I think cookies, not good as breakfast, but pancakes, that's going to be the only answer. But again, it really depends. Why? Because pancakes, like out of my Belgian background, we would never have pancakes for breakfast. Where if you look at like the Americas primarily, I guess everyone just loves pancakes on a Sunday morning. I hope this easy example helps you understanding what the complexity is of generative AI, the prompting, and why we every now and then see that hallucination. I know it might seem like a silly example, but still, customers in my GitHub Copilot classes consistently reported that this helps them understand the complexity of prompting and how to reduce hallucinations. So I would say feel free to reuse my example whenever you try to explain prompting to your peers. Advanced prompt engineering goes beyond simply asking for what you want. It's really about shaping the model's reasoning. Effective strategies include defining the model's role to anchor its perspective, structuring prompts with explicit constraints, and using step-by-step reasoning cues to guide complex problem solving. Prompt engineering may also involve iteratively micro-tuning the prompt, adjusting tone and format, and providing examples to steer outputs with precision. And then finally, leveraging techniques such as chain of thought, scaffolding, self-critique loops, and context-rich priming also helps produce responses that are more accurate, consistent, and aligned with the intent. Let me share a few examples to illustrate this even more. Assigning the model a role or a persona anchors its perspective and significantly affects the quality of its output. For example, you could prompt, explain Kubernetes, and then yes, it will effectively explain what this technology provides. But what if you optimize this prompt with specific role definitions, such as you are a senior cloud architect mentoring a junior engineer. Explain Kubernetes using practical analogies and real-world deployment scenarios. You can expect that the level of detail and accuracy will differ substantially from those in the previous example. The reason why this works? Well, the model now knows how to speak to whom and from what perspective, thereby reducing ambiguity and improving relevance. Another technique is using structured prompts. A clear structure reduces randomness and compels the model to adhere to intended format. So for example, write a prompt like, summarize this article in exactly 3 bullet points. One about the problem, one about the solution, and one about the impact. And keep each bullet under 12 words. This again works well because the provided constraints serve as the guardrails. The model now has a blueprint for the output. Chain of thought is another popular approach. You don't need the model's whole reasoning. You just need to guide it through think in steps. This prompt approach could look something like this. Break down your reasoning into 3 steps. Step 1, identify the core issue. Step 2, evaluate the possible approaches. And step 3, recommend the best option with justification. And then why not adding step 4 to then provide only the final recommendation in your answer. Where then in this scenario, you're shaping the model's internal reasoning without asking it to reveal the entire chain of thought. This slide explains exactly how GitHub Copilot handles prompts through inbound as well as outbound data flows. Prompts are received, then processed, and then returned in the outbound flow as suggestions or responses, highlighting the life cycle of each individual request. Now, understanding this flow helps developers like yourself reason about timing, data handling, and why Copilot responses behave as they do, specifically in regulated or enterprise environments. Now, also remember from Module 1, where we talked about the Microsoft and GitHub Responsible AI framework. Noticeable here in the diagram, what we call toxicity filters. This maps with policies and boundaries, which controls several of those responsibilities. Guardrails even if you want, which in this case you don't even always control. It's also why it would be wrong to assume that all generative AI tools are dealing with responsible AI in the same way. Trust me, they're definitely not. With all that, let's zoom in a bit on how Copilot exactly handles data in a different way for code completion as well as in chat. For inline suggestions, prompts are discarded immediately, while chat interactions may be retained for a limited period to support conversation context. It's also possible to retrieve your chat history for up to 30 days, at least in my setup, although enterprise policies may configure this. And as a summary of the topic of prompt engineering, or remember, we like to call it the art of the prompt, there's a listing of the types of prompts Copilot supports, from direct questions to contextual scenarios. This transparency helps users understand how their data is used and the extent of control. Whew, I can imagine that was a lot. Now, if you have been using generative AI tools such as Microsoft 365 Copilot, ChatGPT, or similar tools, this likely makes sense. But as you know, as a trainer, I don't like to come in with any assumptions since I don't know your experience level on the topic I'm presenting on. So I hope it's all clear for everyone. But you also know my style of presenting in meantime. After talking maybe this much on a topic, I need to switch back to my demo environment and really show you things in action. So no surprise that in my next demo here, I'm going to show you how different prompt styles and added context can significantly improve Copilot responses. Next part is focusing a bit on the Copilot prompting and the data. I already showed you a few prompts, but remember out of the presentation, we talked about different prompting techniques, and I just want to bring in some of those examples. To make the screen a little bit lighter, I'm going to remove my previous chat. I'm going to close my terminal because I don't really need it. And I'm going to close some of these files because now I want to get some information about my project. Now, to try and show you the power of this, I'm going to reuse one of my first prompts that I did in the first module out of my first demo. And that's a prompt where I'm asking to provide me a high-level documentation about this project. I didn't specify any context, didn't add any files, and as you can see, it's basically doing about the same as what it did like an hour ago when I was talking about the other module. It's just adding more context, it's reading through all the API calls, and so on and so on. One other thing, I'm freezing my screen, is this little button here. You might go like, well, this is a lot of information, maybe I didn't ask for it, but at the same time I would say, think back about my high-level documentation prompt. 6 words, nothing too detailed, and I think it's already pretty detailed feedback or prompt response, as we call it. But whenever you want, you can interrupt, you can stop it. You go like, I don't need this, and I'm just going to interrupt it. Why is that important? Because remember, in the backend, it's running the GitHub Copilot tokens. each and every interaction, you running a prompt gets translated to tokens, and that's in the end what your organization pays for as well. So if you see a lot of like activity or prompt response where you go like, I don't really need it, maybe it's the wrong prompt information, maybe you asked the wrong questions, right? You can stop it whenever you want. But again, even out of a high-level prompt, it's already providing quite some details. But let me show you another example. And I'm just grabbing this from my little prompt cheat sheet because this one I think is a little bit more complete. Imagine that's what I'm going to try and show you here, is that you have a certain structure, a policy, a process about what documentation means for your DevOps team. So what I'm explaining here is, provide me, my dear Copilot, project documentation for the DevOps team. Start with business summary. It's targeting CXO like executive level and other business stakeholders. Could be project leads, could be investors maybe. Next to that, switch to more technical, deep technical level documentation, where we're again targeting what I called the persona in the presentation before, targeting senior developers and solution architects. And then for that specific section, because again, it might be a template in a Word document or something, use the following structure: technical characteristics, the framework, deployment instructions, and potential code optimization. That's a lot in one single prompt. It's creating documentation, it's targeting the right audience, and then it's also looking into the code, it's analyzing the framework, analyzing the technical details, and then I'm also asking, well, screen my code, and if you find any potential code optimizations, for now, whatever that means, I want you to bring those in. It's not just analyzing, it's not just writing a simple README file, but it's going to produce a pretty extensive level of documentation, where now at the same time, you're in control of the structure, the flow, the layout. And it's just running, and I hope I'm not going to make it too complex by scrolling up and down, so I'm going to give it another couple of seconds. And it just keeps going. Look at that. That's a huge amount of information, but it's obviously what I asked for out of my prompt, and I guess technically actually a little bit more. I asked for business technical documentation, start targeting the executive audience with executive summary. Where now executive summary is giving me a little paragraph, it's targeting the different application users, students, admins, detailing what the app is about, what kind of activities, how to interact with investments, return on investment. And then I asked for more technical documentation with a specific layout. Start with architecture pattern, define the technology stack, some code characteristics, and it's now analyzing each and every of my code files. All the way at the end, I also asked like, hey, maybe if you can suggest some potential code optimization, it's now start looking into that one, where it already detects some potential security posture problems. Explaining why using Fast API, explaining some of the features, and again, it just keeps going, adding how to run this app, how to compile it, what to verify, and then maybe, and I guess it knows a little bit about what is Peter doing, typically building apps and then deploying them into Azure. Well, it's already helping me. Spoiling a bit of the other demos that I have for other modules, but you just can assume what's happening here. That's what the power of prompting is about. Now you could go like, okay, this is cool, and we understand the prompting, but what if we want to add more specifics? So in the presentation, I talked about adding context. I already showed you a few examples where one of the easy context scenarios is using your open files. So whenever you have an active file over here in the editor, it's moving that into this is the prime file that I'm going to use for my context. I showed you drag and drop before. I can show you again, and it's now using this as the source of information. But that's not all of it. I can click this little clippy maybe for some of you. Yes, I'm dating myself here. But you can click the attachment and it's going to allow you to add context. I'm not going to walk you through all these options. I will bring in some of these in other modules. But the starting point is the open editor. Everything that we have in our current VS Code project, open files, that's what it can use. But what if we bring in other files and folders? Example here might be that you have sample code, boilerplate code, or maybe full production ready code in another file and folder on your local development workstation. You could point to related files. They're not inside this repo, but there might be in another repo, again, on your local machine. You can bring in screenshot windows. You can bring in problems like screenshots, maybe information from the terminal, where now you can use that add terminal, or here just pointing to it. Another example is source control. So what I can do is, let me go back, selecting the attachment, add source control, where now it's going to show me the history of my repo. I have like 3 different steps that I did in preparation for my demo, and I can now start using them. I'm going to select them, source control. I'm going to use my initial commit. I'm going to go back source control using the second one, and then eventually using the latest one, or any in between. I only got like 3 different examples where I now have my index file and I have my source control, my launch, where I'm like, well, I don't need launch, I don't need index, because I could now run a specific prompt, create an overview of the different commits and describe what happened. How many times do you get access to a repo with 5, 50, 500 source control updates in a single branch, in multiple branches, and then you go like, well, I want to find out what happened. What you would do is, while this is running, you would go into source control, and then obviously you see the commits over here. You would select your commits. You would look into all those details. It's not wrong, because in the end we're not changing how we've been handling repos, how we've been looking into code changes. But now with a prompt, we get a massive amount of accurate information. What is my commit timeline? I just dragged and dropped a few commits and it's nicely ordering them. Well, on a certain date, the author made some changes. We updated some of the code, adding some infrastructure, rewriting code, adding some other pieces of information in the repo. Then we started the exercise, clearly explaining what happened. And then once we started modifying code in some of my previous demos, as you are aware about now, it's literally writing all those details. That's the power of GitHub Copilot, where now I'm using not just the logic of my code, but actually bringing in that source control information using a different step. This slide explains how GitHub Copilot relies on large language models, or LLMs, trained on large data sets from the public internet to understand and generate code. These models excel at recognizing patterns and producing contextually relevant responses, because LLMs can be fine-tuned for specific tasks. They are both powerful but still flexible, supporting applications ranging from general coding assistance to super specialized workflows. Now, not all LLMs are equal. I'll show you in my upcoming demo what that actually means. I often do get questions from learners about, hey Peter, which model to use? Well, Honestly, I don't know, apart from, I would say, my own experience. Now, based on that experience, the OpenAI GPT models are effective across the board. However, I also found that the Anthropic Claude models, I think, perform a little bit better on specific code writing tasks. I don't have it at hand, but the GitHub repository contains benchmark results for various tasks, showing how well the supported large language models perform on specific actions. Alternatively, you could also look up more information on the AI company's website specifically. This brings me to my final demonstration in this module, in which I'll show you how you as a developer can interact with different large language models within Copilot chat as well as inline chat. For the last part, I'm going to talk a bit about those large language models. I talked about them, you probably have a good idea what it's about, but I'm going to show you what the power of switching large language models can mean. For all my examples in my prompting, I used Anthropic Claude Sonnet 4.5, which is a pretty up-to-date, at least depending when you're watching this video, but a pretty up-to-date large language model. Now imagine that, like I explained, the behavior, the experience, the logic, maybe even the knowledge might be different across different language models. So how do you switch from one model to the other? Well, you just select it. And remember, depending on your settings, depending on even the GitHub Copilot plan, not all of these might be available. But from here, you can immediately switch back and forth. Some of these are a little bit more expensive. That's what you can see in the last column here, where you can easily switch from one to the other. I would heavily recommend, if you do have access to multiple models, try to find what works best for your specific scenario. I used a prompt like a minute ago to get some clarification, write me documentation, and I'm going to try and do the same. I'm going to switch to GPT-4o, and maybe from here, running a prompt, can you provide me with a high-level project description? I showed you this prompt multiple times, and again, I don't want to focus too much on like the quality of the response because I'm pretty confident it is actually quite accurate. But you can see now, just by switching the language model, it's not that level of detail that we had with Claude. And I'm not doing the demo to position like, oh my God, please don't use the GPT models. That is not at all the message. It's about what works for your specific scenario. Even better, I can go into some code piece. I do Control-I, running my inline chat, and now you can see that I still have Claude over here. I have GPT-4 over here, and now you can actually compare those two experiences with each other. If you switch to GPT-5, which again in the time of recording was pretty new, like I think we released this probably not even 2 months ago, GPT-5 has more reasoning capabilities. So for example here, I'm going to clear my launch, so I'm switching back to my application coding file, and I could ask for how should I update the app so it also keeps track of student categories. Well, now it needs a little bit more time. Why? Because it first needs to analyze my existing code. It needs to understand what do I mean with this super level or super high level question, because what I want is like storing more information about my students. It's going to look into my existing code and then coming up with some feedback. Now, as you can see here, I've been trying to talk through the experience, and it's working. And you might go like, well, it's not really doing anything. But what it does is actually doing a lot. It's reasoning, it's thinking about code suggestions, and it just goes through a more thorough task. It's highlighting all the code changes. In my application file, it's adding more information about like student categories, coming up with some imaginary words, but it's not all that imaginary. Why not remember we had 5 different activity categories, and now it's nicely mapping those activities with student categories as well. So there's a lot of logic going on even in this super basic sample application. Last part about the large language models. I mentioned this multiple times, but let me emphasize once more. Large language models are linked to your Copilot settings. So you can switch to your GitHub environment, go into Copilot settings, and you're going to find all the different supported models over here, and the list is actually growing every couple of weeks. Where now you might have a different experience in your, let's say, corporate business related VS Code GitHub Copilot integrated experience, and then maybe on a different machine you might not have all language models available because you have a different license plan, and you could always validate, why do I not see all those models? Remember, in the previous module we also talked about all this being controlled using GitHub Copilot policies. This was a long demo. I showed you a lot of different capabilities. We started with overall GitHub Copilot experience, where I showed you the chat experience. Next to that, we moved into the inline chat experience. Control I on a VS Code experience, giving you that 1 or 2 liner experience, but everything else is just using chat, but from a smaller scoping. From there, we moved into GitHub Copilot CLI, where you could run it from the terminal, you could run it from within the chat experience, and then pointing to the terminal. Pretty cool, pretty convenient. From there, we switched to prompting and data, where I used that high-level documentation prompt, and then that one more detailed prompt with all requirements for my project documentation. And then last, showed you that experience, how you can switch across different large language models. With that, I'm going to switch back to the presentation and wrapping up this module. Let me close this module by briefly touching on another capability you have available, namely content exclusions. Already talked about this a bit in module 1, by the way. Content exclusions allow organizations to prevent sensitive files or repositories from influencing Copilot suggestions. This feature ensures sensitive data is protected during code completion as well as chat interactions. While I cannot provide all the details of what this entails, note that there are limitations and configuration options at the repository level, organization, and enterprise levels that help teams balance AI assistance with security and governance needs. This concludes this module. Now allow me to revisit the module's key outcomes. We discussed how Copilot can be managed, how you can customize it, and how it's used across editors, but also inside the CLI, as well as the chat experience. We also spent quite some time explaining feature usage, prompting, data handling, and understanding large language model concepts. So by now, you should feel super confident about understanding how GitHub Copilot actually works and how to use it effectively in your real-world development scenarios. There are many ways to continue your learning journey. I encourage you to watch other videos in this course or search for your next favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn. I want to thank you for being here with me for this feature-oriented module. Now there's still much more to discuss. So as always, I'd like to invite you to join me into the next module where I will cover several additional GitHub Copilot use cases that you can apply immediately in your own environment and during your development work. I'm already looking forward to see you back in the next module.